For the past 2 weeks, I've used the M1 Pro MacBook Pro, 16GB of RAM, 10-core CPU and 16-core GPU, with 1TB of storage. I've edited a few videos and worked on several photo shoots. And in today's video, I just want to talk about my opinion on this machine and why I believe you don't need the M1 Max. Alright, so let's talk about my workflow first. So I'm into photography and videography. So I use applications such as Lightroom and Capture One, but also Photoshop. And I use applications such as Final Cut Pro to edit my YouTube videos, or Instagram Reels, or other YouTube Shorts. I also use other productivity apps to send mails, take notes, organize my ideas, etc. This is the way I use the computer, and this is the way I believe a lot of us use this kind of machine. So this is why I want to make this video. Alright, so let's talk about the ergonomics of this laptop. So using this MacBook Pro is honestly a great pleasure. Apple brought back a lot of ports, so HDMI ports, SD card ports. So using this laptop means that you don't need any dongle to travel around. The keyboard also offers a great experience. Honestly, typing on it, it's really fine compared to the previous butterfly keyboard. The screen is crisp. It's also HDR compatible. It has amazing colors and great color accuracy. And the speakers are one of the greatest speakers out there with amazing bass. Honestly, I almost always use my headphones, so that's not a huge deal for me. And if we talk about the screen, we have to talk about the notch. So yes, there is a notch on the top of the screen, but honestly, after 2 weeks, I don't even realize it's there. And it actually integrates pretty well with the menu bar, meaning that you won't even notice that it's there, and it will give you extra screen real estate compared to the other screen without a notch, but a bigger bezel. So when it comes to the size of the screen, it depends on you and on what you prioritize. If you want to be on the go all the time and have a smaller form factor for a laptop, go for the 14-inch. But if you're like me and you want to edit pictures and videos on a bigger screen, even when you're working at a cafe or whatever, I think the 16-inch is a better option. And yes, the battery life will change slightly depending on the size of the screen that you choose, but that's inevitable because the 16-inch has a bigger battery. Alright, so let's talk about performance. So this particular MacBook Pro, so 16GB of RAM, M1 Pro, 10-core CPU, 16-core GPU, can handle pretty much everything I throw at it without any problem. So Apple introduced unified memory with the M1 design, meaning that CPUs and GPU share the same memory, so that data can be processed real fast and really efficiently on the chip. This basically changes everything that we understand in terms of the amount of memory necessary to run programs such as, Lightroom, Capture One, etc. And even if the amount of memory you have is not enough to run the programs that you want, they also introduced the swap, which is basically writing into SSD instead of writing into the RAM. And because the SSD is so fast on those particular models, you actually don't see a lot of difference. I invite you to watch a particular video made by Max Tech, where he compares the performance of the 16GB of RAM M1 MacBook Pro and the 32GB of RAM. And you will see that there is almost no difference between the two machines because of the swap mechanism. So that is why I would recommend the 16GB of RAM, save some money and invest it somewhere else. Okay, so let's talk first about photo editing. So if you're working like me with Capture One, importing 100 pictures, so 26 megapixel X-Trans sensor from Fuji, took me about 35 seconds. Whenever I apply edits on each one of those pictures, it's done real time, whether you're talking about grain, you're talking about denoising or color grading, etc. Everything is done real time. There is no lag on this particular aspect. When it comes to exporting 20 pictures optimized for Instagram took me about 15 seconds. So this is the kind of performance that you can expect from this machine, right? So with this kind of performance, you don't need to wait around much to get things done. This kind of photo editing program mostly use CPU resources. So moving from the M1 Pro to the M1 Max will not give you any real benefit because both have the same amount of CPU cores. When it comes to video editing, this is where I was blown away by the performance of this computer. Using Final Cut Pro, it handles 4K footage from my Fuji X-T4, so 10-bit 422, also from my drone, from the GoPros, with everything stacked on the same timeline. You can just throw any footage on your timeline and scroll through it without any lag. It is rendered real time and you can visualize it. And that also goes for transitions, for LUTs, for any kind of effects that you can throw at it. Of course, if you start working with multiple 8K footage, then at that moment, yes, you might need the M1 Max, but I think that most of us work mostly with 4K footage, so the M1 Pro is doing a great job at handling it. So let's talk about exporting now in Final Cut Pro. So it took me to export a 10-minute 4K video in H.264 better quality, it took me about 8 minutes. So yes, 8 minutes on a laptop to export this kind of footage is really a good performance. And this video contains several streams of 4K footage, some LUTs, some transitions, some motion VFX plugins. So of course, if you invest an extra $800 on the M1 Max, you might see improved performance, but is it worth it to throw $800 on the M1 Max to save 1 minute? I'm not sure. That's up to you to decide. So since I bought this laptop, I have never heard the fans. It's always silent. Whether I'm exporting, whether I'm rendering, I actually have never heard the fans running on this laptop. So I guess they made a good job with the chip design and also the cooling system. It's really efficient. And after doing all the tests that I talked about today, the laptop is still at 92% batteries, meaning that I was able to work on a project and render it and export several pictures from Capture One and only consume 6% of the battery. So that's how efficient that machine is. Alright, so after 2 weeks using this particular machine, I have to say that I do not regret purchasing it. I do not regret spending the amount of money that I spent because it's quite pricey, but I also do not regret not spending more because I don't feel like I am missing out on any functionalities. I think most of us do not need the M1 Max. You know, you can make it more expensive, but at the end of the day, it's just a tool. And if you make your tool more expensive and you don't use most of the specs, it's kind of useless. So yeah, I would say just go for this configuration. So 16GB of RAM, M1 Pro, 10-core CPU, 16-core GPU. I chose 1TB of storage, but that's up to you. And yeah, maybe invest the extra money that you get by not going for the M1 Max in, I don't know, learning something or traveling or whatever. That's up to you, but I think it would be a better investment than just throwing an extra $1,000 on a machine that you will not really push. Alright, so I hope that you enjoyed today's video, and if you enjoyed it, as always, consider to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.